The night before the wedding, Daniel sat alone on the edge of his childhood bed, staring at the pale crack in the ceiling that had been there since he was 12. The house was quiet except for the ticking clock in the hallway, each second sounding like a verdict. Tomorrow, he would marry a woman he had never met, a woman everyone whispered about, but no one spoke of kindly. He felt trapped, angry, and ashamed, all at once, not because of who she was, but because of how little choice he'd been given. When his father had said, "This is the only way we save the land," Daniel had known arguing was useless. Ranch, the debts, the family name, everything rested on a marriage arranged by desperation. Daniel's family had once been proud. The land had stretched green and wide, cattle roaming under endless skies. But drought, bad loans, and one cruel storm had pushed them to the edge of losing it all. That was when Harold Whitmore appeared, a wealthy businessman with a single condition for saving the ranch: Daniel would marry his daughter. No courtship, no introductions, just a contract dressed up as tradition. Daniel had expected someone, polished and aloof, a woman who would see him as a transaction as much as he saw her. What he hadn't expected was the hush that fell over the room when he finally saw her. Emily Whitmore stood at the end of the aisle in a simple ivory dress. She was large, undeniably so, with soft arms and a full face that flushed under the weight. Of so many staring eyes, a murmur rippled through the guests, some curious, some cruel, some pitying. Daniel felt heat rise in his chest, not from attraction or disgust, but from shock at his own unpreparedness. No one had warned him, or perhaps they had, and he hadn't listened. As Emily walked toward him, her steps steady despite the whispers, Daniel realized how unfair the moment was. Everyone had already decided who she was, and he, standing there, felt the pressure to do the same. The ceremony passed like a blur. Vows were exchanged, rings slipped on, applause politely offered. When Daniel kissed Emily's cheek, it was stiff and brief, more for the crowd than for her. He noticed how she flinched, just slightly, as if she'd expected that distance. At the reception, Daniel drank too much and spoke too little. Emily sat across from him, hands folded, answering questions with careful politeness. She smiled often, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. When they finally left for the ranch that night, the car ride was silent except for the hum of the engine and the unspoken tension between two strangers. Bound by obligation, life together began awkwardly. Mee moved into the ranch house with quiet efficiency, unpacking her things neatly, respecting Daniel's space. She didn't try to decorate or rearrange anything without asking. She rose early, cooked breakfast, and spent hours reading or walking slowly around the property. Daniel kept his distance, burying himself in work. He told himself this arrangement was temporary, that once the debt was settled, they'd find a way out. He avoided looking at her for too long, afraid of what he might feel or what others might think. The town, however, was less restrained. Daniel heard the comments at the feed store, the diner, the gas station. Jokes, snide remarks, thinly veiled pity. Some people asked him outright how he could stand it. Others assumed he was suffering a private humiliation. Daniel nodded along, laughed when expected, but something began to twist uncomfortably inside him. He started noticing how Emily was treated when she came into town, how shopkeepers talked over her, how people stared, how children whispered. She pretended not to notice, but Daniel saw the way her shoulders tightened, the way her smile became practiced. One afternoon, Daniel came home early after a fence repair was canceled. Found Emily in the kitchen, sitting at the table surrounded by notebooks and papers. She startled when she saw him, as if she'd been caught doing something wrong. Embarrassed, she explained she was trying to figure out the ranch finances, hoping to help. Daniel almost laughed. It seemed absurd to him. But then he looked closer at the numbers, the notes scribbled in careful handwriting. She had spotted errors he'd missed, unnecessary expenses, ways to restructure payments. For the first time, Daniel felt something shift. Not gratitude. Exactly. Respect. Over the following weeks, he began to see more of Emily's quiet strengths. She rose before dawn to pack his lunches, often including small notes wishing him a good day. She volunteered at the local animal shelter, coming home smelling of hay and soap, eyes bright with purpose. When a calf fell ill, she stayed up all night researching treatments, helping Daniel save it. She never complained about the long days, the stares, or the loneliness. And slowly, Daniel realized that his assumptions had been as shallow as everyone else's. The turning point came one evening during the town's annual harvest festival. Daniel hadn't wanted to go, but Emily insisted, saying it was important to be part of the community. As they walked through the fairgrounds, Daniel noticed how people's eyes followed Emily. He felt that familiar mix of defensiveness and shaman till. He heard a group of men laughing behind them. One comment, sharp and cruel, cut through the noise. Emily stiffened. Daniel stopped walking. He turned, anger blazing, and told them to shut up. His voice was loud enough to draw attention. The men looked stunned, then embarrassed. Daniel didn't care. He took Emily's hand and walked away, heart pounding. Emily didn't say anything until they reached the car. Then, quietly, she said, "Thank you." Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. In that moment, Daniel realized he didn't just feel obligated to her. He felt protective, and that scared him more than anything else. That night, they talked for hours. Emily told him about her life, about growing up wealthy but lonely, about being judged her entire life by her body, about learning to make herself small so others would feel comfortable. She admitted she hadn't wanted the marriage either, but had agreed because she was tired of being treated like a burden. Daniel listened, really listened, and for the first time, he spoke honestly too about the pressure of expectations, the fear of failure, the resentment he'd carried. They finally went to bed. It was with a new understanding between them. Fragile but real. Change didn't happen overnight. There were still awkward moments, misunderstandings, and insecurities. But Daniel began to seek Emily's opinion, to include her in decisions. They laughed together, argued sometimes, learned each other's habits. Daniel noticed how Emily's laugh filled a room, how her kindness drew people in when given the chance. He also noticed how his own feelings were changing, not because she had changed, but because he had finally allowed himself to see her. The ranch began to recover. Emily's financial insights and Daniel's hard work slowly turned things around. Word spread, and attitudes in town shifted. People started greeting Emily by name, asking her advice, respecting her presence. Daniel watched this transformation with quiet pride. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset bleed gold across the fields, Daniel realized something startling. He was happy, not relieved, not resigned. Genuinely happy. Months later, Daniel stood in that same bedroom, where he had once felt trapped. But now, Emily lay beside him, reading, her feet tucked under his leg. The ceiling crack was still there, unchanged. Everything else felt different. Daniel turned to her and said what he'd been afraid to admit even to himself, that he loved her. Emily looked at him for a long moment, searching his face, then smiled through tears. She said she loved him too, not because she had to, but because he had chosen her every day since. Their story spread through the town, often retold in simplified, sensational ways. But the truth was quieter and more powerful. A marriage that began as a transaction had become a partnership. A woman judged by her appearance had been revealed as strong, intelligent, and deeply human. A man who thought he was sacrificing his future had found it instead. In the end, what no one expected wasn't a dramatic escape or a tragic ending. It was something far rarer and more inspiring. Two people learning to see each other beyond fear and prejudice, choosing compassion over assumptions, and discovering that love often arrives disguised as the very thing we're taught to reject.